Now, there is some new faces that weren't here last night, so we'll just have a quick little recap. Barbara, who are you?
I've got one. My name is Barbara O'Neill, and I'm married to Michael O'Neill, and Michael and I run a health retreat just 1 hour west of Kempsey. Kempsey is exactly halfway between Sydney and Brisbane on the east coast of Australia. And we have 450 acres. We've bought an Aboriginal boarding school that had gone into receivership, so we've got a lot of buildings and it's in a beautiful area. And people come to our health retreat for either 1 or 2 week programs. They go through a detox, couple of days of juices, and then vegetarian food. They have massages and steam baths every afternoon, so there's a variety of things that we do.
And how long have you been there?
We've been in that area for, I think, about 15 years now, and before that we ran a health retreat in Melbourne for 5 years. And then before that, my husband was the business manager at a health retreat in Queensland. Michael and I have been married for 18 years, so he was the business manager at that health retreat before we married, and for 1 year after we married. And then after a year, he said, I would like to start my own health retreat. And there was a place in Melbourne that asked him to do that. And I said, who will be your health director? He said, you. I said, oh no, I'm just a mother that helps other mothers. He said, you'll be good, and he left the room. That was it. So I, with great fear and trepidation, I think my lectures were very, very simple back then. And I think the best way to learn is to teach.
Well, it seems to have been going all right for you. So, yes. We do have a couple of questions, but before that, afterwards tonight we're going to have some nice cool water with some minted water, I think it is. Minted water, so hang around and get rehydrated. And there's also some books and DVDs out there that you might be interested in, so take a look at them. There was a couple of questions from last night. If you have questions, the question box is out the back too, so you can put your questions out there for us. The 2 questions that came from yesterday was, does sugar cause type 2 diabetes?
It's a very good question, and I'll be answering it in the lecture this evening. But it has a big contributing effect.
And our second question was, what causes fluid retention, especially in the legs?
Believe it or not, I'm covering that tomorrow night when I look at heart health. Because when I look at heart health, I'll be talking about water and salt, and fluid retention is all about the kidneys and water and salt, and so I'll be covering that tomorrow night.
Okay, so if they ask that question, they'll just have to come tomorrow night as well. All right, over to you.
Thank you. The beauty of the lectures is I'm able to cover it in detail. There's an old proverb, it's Proverbs 14 verse 6 that says, knowledge is easy to him that understands. And that's one of my favourite proverbs, because when you understand how the body works, when you understand the functions of the body, then you automatically have the knowledge on how to treat the body. Now, before we begin, it is my habit, I ask God to come and teach us. So please bow your heads for a moment. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this body. Thank you for this opportunity to look at it, to discuss it and learn more about it. I pray that you'll help us to understand these things tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. So the title of tonight's lecture is Diabetes and Weight Loss. And diabetes has some specifics and weight loss has some specifics, but with diabetes and weight loss, there's a lot of areas where there's certainly some common denominators. Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. And food plays a major role in diabetes, and food plays a major role in weight loss. What I'd like to begin with is doing an assessment on what most people eat. And I would like to suggest that most people in the developed countries today are huge carbohydrate consumers. Never in the history of man have human beings consumed so many carbohydrates. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to begin with a carbohydrate assessment list. Question: what would most New Zealanders and Australians have had for breakfast this morning? Cereal. We know it's popular because there's a whole aisle devoted to it in the supermarket. And we know it's popular because, unfortunately, a lot of people today are on the screens till late. They go to bed too late. They wake up too late. They're in a big hurry. They've got to get to work. Cereal. Pour it into the bowl. Pour milk on it. Goes like wet tissue paper. Down the hatch in 10 minutes. Out the door. Can you see why it's a very popular food? When I said in one meeting that I gave, what do most Aussies have for breakfast? And one lady said, bacon and eggs. I said, not anymore. No one cooks. Well, hardly anyone cooks. Another is toast, so bread. And we know bread's popular because there's a whole aisle devoted to that. And then mid-morning. You see, because these two don't take a person very far, what are they wanting to do mid-morning? And we went past a shop this morning and it had lots of big cakes in the window, and I looked in and it was packed. So people then will go to the morning teas, yeah? Cakes, biscuits, so we'll say cakes, etc., donuts, and another food that Australians love, and I think Kiwis too, pie. I know in Australia there's even a song about it, meat pies, kangaroos and Holden cars, yeah, something like that. And Europeans have introduced Aussies to another fast food called pizza, another fast food, high carb, and pasta. I didn't know what pasta was till I was about 18. I'm a fifth generation Australian Scottish descent. We had sausages or chops, mashed potatoes, frozen peas or beans every single night of the week, except for Sunday. Roast lamb. And everyone I knew ate like that. All my neighbours, all my relatives ate like that. I thought everyone in the world ate like that. But when I was about 18, I was introduced to pasta. And Asians have introduced Aussies to rice. I don't think I ate rice till I was in my late teens. And my husband's an Irishman, so every main meal must contain potatoes. And then last and certainly least in nutritive value is the pure crystallised acid that's extracted from the sugarcane plant, and that is sugar. Would you agree with me? Aussies, New Zealanders are high carbohydrate consumers. Now what I want to do is I want to take you inside the CBD. Do you remember the CBD? We looked at it briefly last night. The central business district of the human body is the inside workings of the cell. You see, all of these foods break down in the gastrointestinal tract to a singular molecular structure called glucose. And glucose is then absorbed into the blood. And then it becomes part of the body because the blood is the life of the flesh. Now the blood takes that glucose on the M1 main highway, portal vein, straight to the project manager. That's the liver. Now the liver, as the project manager, is orchestrating what happens to everything that comes into the body. And so the liver, first of all, sends the glucose to the cell. So let's have a look at what happens inside the cell. So the glucose comes inside the cell under the action of insulin. Insulin's basically the key that unlocks the door to get the glucose inside the cell. And then it goes through a 20-step pathway. And that 20-step pathway gives us 2 units of energy. Isn't that why we eat? To get energy so our eyes see, so our ears hear, so our brain works, so our heart beats, so every single cell in the body is running because of the glucose. At the end result of this 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. Pyruvate is the chemical form of glucose that gets fed into what's often called the powerhouse. Called the powerhouse because this 8-step pathway gives us a whopping 36 units of energy. Wow, what a difference. Now that pathway there is an oxygen pathway. It uses oxygen. This pathway uses no oxygen. What a difference oxygen makes. By the way, just a little sideline here. How are you going to feel if every single one of your 100 trillion cells has enough oxygen to get to that 8-step pathway? How are you going to feel? We're not going to be able to hold you down. How many people today do you know, when you say, how do you feel, say, oh, all right, not too bad. What's not too bad? Not too good. You know how it is, getting there. How many people, when you say, how are you, say, fantastic? You'd almost say, oh, what's wrong with them? Oxygen is a very powerful thing, it's oxygen. I have to hold myself back here because we're not talking about oxygen right now, we're talking about glucose. But the oxygen explains why so much more energy. So that's the first place that the liver will send the glucose is down the pathway to give us energy. So number one, that is where the glucose goes to the cell. But only so much glucose can be fed through the pathway. And so now the liver causes some to be stored in the muscle cell particularly, like a little bunch of grapes, but they're little molecules of glucose, and they're called glycogen. So glycogen is your quick release glucose stores. So yesterday I had a light soup at about 4:30, I think. Then I worked hard yesterday evening, lecturing to you. I got to bed about 10, I think I was in bed by 10. Slept in a little bit. My habit is I wake at 5, but 5 here at the moment is, 3 a.m, yes, so it was a bit hard to wake up here. So I usually walk at 6 and eat at 7. This morning I walked at 7 and ate a little bit later. And Amelia and I, we found hills where we were, and we did our high intensity running up the hills and recovery down the hills. Where did I get the energy? I hadn't had breakfast yet. I only ate lightly early yesterday. It's my glycogen stores. They're quick release glucose stores. They're just sitting in the muscle cell waiting to be called on. It's not a good time to exercise after you've eaten, because where's all your body's energy going? Digestion. One lady said, well, how am I going to have the energy to walk? I said, it's your glycogen stores. It is the diabetic's best kept secret. All you need to do is something to access that, and 2 things access it. Demand, which is exercise, and the other is water. Very important to be well hydrated. It helps your body access that. There's still glucose left over on a high carbohydrate diet. High carbohydrate diet means high glucose release. And only so much glycogen can be stored. And this glycogen that is in your muscle can only be used by your muscle. Your liver also stores some glycogen, and that can be used all over the body. That's a good brain backup. So now, what is the liver going to do with the excess glucose? It stores it in the most amazing fuel depot in the human body. You may have heard of it. It's called fat cells. And in Australia and New Zealand today, on the high carbohydrate diet, what is happening to many? They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's the third place that your liver causes the glucose to be stored. The pancreas is the organ that we're going to be talking predominantly about. Here it is. And the pancreas lives under your left rib. And the pancreas releases insulin on demand. And so looking at this equation, high glucose demands high insulin. You see that? And one of the amazing things about these fat cells, they don't need insulin to get in, and they don't need sodium. So when this cell starts to get a little bit weary, because you can imagine high carbohydrate, high glucose, high insulin, and the cell is getting so much insulin, and it's already got its fuel, it's already got the stores, so something called insulin resistance steps in. You've heard of insulin resistance? It's almost as if the cell says, I'm sick of the sight of you. I'm sick of the sight of you. We've already got our fuel. We've already got our glycogen stores. So insulin resistance sets up in the cell. But there's another cell that says, just come right on in. No need for insulin. No need for sodium. Just come right in. Who is that? That's the fat cell. So this cell, it needs insulin and it needs sodium. But this cell, it doesn't need any. So what's happening now is you've got insulin resistance. Insulin can't get that glucose in. The glucose is going round and round. Blood sugar levels remain high. Brain says, more insulin, because the brain thinks, it's not getting in. We must need more insulin. And so what's happening here, we've got a problem. More high glucose, more insulin's released. The cell's saying, you're not coming in here. We've seen enough of you. So what's happening over here? Come on in, just come on in. They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, the pancreas just wears out. And the pancreas just says, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And it becomes depleted, it becomes worn out. Do you know that diabetes mellitus means sweet urine? You see, there's just so much glucose running around, it can't go anywhere, and so what happens is the body starts to urinate it out. Sweet urine, glucose in the urine. And one of the signs of diabetes is huge amounts of water. So the body starts saying, we've got to have more and more and more water, and the person actually starts getting very, very tired because hardly anything's happening in here because of the insulin resistance they're set up. It's a terrible situation. The current figures are 400 diabetics diagnosed every week in Australia. That's alarming, isn't it? There was no diabetes until sugar was well established, because what happens when sugar goes into the body, blood glucose levels rise dramatically. This is not a red pen, is it? Anyway, should be red. Blue blood, royal. Blood glucose levels rise dramatically. So very quickly the brain says, quick pancreas, release insulin. And because there was so much glucose, huge amounts of insulins are released. And now blood glucose levels go down. Because remember what insulin does? It's the key that unlocks the door to get the glucose into the cell, into storage, or over here as storage. And so because there was so much insulin released, blood glucose levels now are going too low. Now we've got another crisis. The cells are now starving because of the drop in fuel. And our brain, it consumes 15 times the fuel of any other cell. So brain starts to fade. This is called hypoglycemia, very low blood sugar. In fact, if it gets too low, the person can pass out. So very quickly the brain says, pancreas, stop the insulin, quick, release glucagon. Now glucagon is the other hormone that the pancreas makes, and it's designed to get the blood sugar level up again. But what does the person usually do down there? Have a lolly, have a biscuit, have a Mars bar, have a Coke, have a quick sweet, yeah? What happens then? Up again. What does the brain go? Oh no, now we're too high. Stop the glucagon, release the insulin. Oh no, now we're too low. Stop the insulin. Can you see what's happening? Up, down, up, down. It's called this biochemical whiplash. Up, down. How does the person feel up there? Spun up like a top. How does the person feel down there? Oh, they're passing out. A man said to me one day, Barbara, he was a diabetic. He said, I had a diabetic crash on the bus today. I said, really? What time? 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I said, oh, what did you have for lunch? Why am I asking that? Because the last thing he ate is what's going to do it. He cleared his throat. He obviously didn't want to tell me. He said, 2 donuts and a can of Coke. I said, aha. Now I know what caused your crash. It went so high and it was so dangerous, that high, that the body reacted as in a crisis, releasing too much insulin, and where did he go? Now, if someone had a diabetic crash in front of me, I'd reach into their pocket, get the lolly or the sugar, put it into their mouth. It would save their life. As they came round, I would say to them, would you like me to show you how to prevent that ever happening again? It's like the young man, Dan. He came to our health retreat 2 years ago. He's a type 1 diabetic. He'd had type 1 diabetes since he was 15. He got it from a very strong course of antibiotics. Some drugs have a side effect of killing off the beta cells in the pancreas. He came to our retreat. He's 20. He's a little overweight. Can you see why he's a little overweight? High insulin it's a one-set mind. I must store, I must store, I must store. Very difficult to lose weight when there's high insulin. He was with us for 4 weeks. He did 2 weeks on the program and he helped in the garden for 2 weeks. First week, if he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he would wake up and he would take a lolly. He was a very quiet man. I didn't actually know it was happening, but we're not Starlick 13. We don't go through your bags. He said it would always give him a headache because the blood sugar level would go bang. And he'd go back to sleep. Second week, he decided to try an apple. Now, in the middle of the night, it takes a long time to eat an apple. That would get his blood sugar level up, but he wouldn't get the headache. The third week, he tried something different. If he got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, he would jump out of bed and do 30 push-ups. Got his blood sugar level up again. Where did that come from? What happened when he did 30 push-ups? What did it access, students? His glycogen stores. Whew. He told me one morning that he got up and his blood glucose levels were 3. Now 3 is nearly passing out. He had a couple of big glasses of water, had a little bit of Celtic salt first. I'll talk about that in a minute. Helps to get the water inside the cell, all those minerals. Put his joggers on and went on a high intensity run. And I'll talk about that in a minute too. High intensity up the hill, slow down the hill. High intensity up the hill. That high intensity, what did it access? His glycogen stores. He came back, took his blood glucose levels, they were 9. From 3 to 9, and he'd had nothing to eat. Now, he's a very shy man and a very quiet man. By the third week, he said to me, why hasn't anyone told me about glycogen? It's the best kept secret, is these glycogen stores. Now, we had a diabetic nurse doing our program, and when she heard what he was doing, she said, this is very dangerous. He said, is it? He said, well, if you think it's dangerous, go running with an apple in your pocket. He was excited, so excited. He was accessing his glycogen stores, but he was also eating a food program that was very low in carbohydrates. Way back in the 80s, Dr. Atkins showed this. In fact, Dr. Atkins, he did it for weight loss. He stopped the carbs to lose weight because he theorised if I stop the carbs, and don't have the glucose coming in, my body will start to eat the fat stores. That was he theorised. He did it on himself. And it worked. So what did he eat? You might not know what his full diet was. He ate a high fibre diet. 3 cups of vegetables a day with the exclusion of the potato. The wild yam, sweet potato, you called it kumara, is that how you say it? Kumara. It's different to the potato. It has low glycemic index. We'll look at that in a minute. He ate a lot of fibre. He also ate a lot of protein. And this is one area of the Atkins diet that everyone talks about, is the high protein. And he was also eating quite generous amounts of fat. Now, these 3 food groups keep the food in the stomach longer, so the person doesn't get hungry. Fibre keeps the food in the stomach longer because fibre binds up all the glucose and slowly releases it. And that's what the diabetic needs. Protein is the food that's broken down in the stomach. So when you have protein in your food, it keeps the food in the stomach longer. Fat keeps the food in the stomach longer because it coats the food. And that's very good news because it means you can go quite a distance between meals. And the fact is we have one stomach and one stomach only. And it takes about 3 to 4 hours to digest a meal, and then the stomach loves a 1 hour rest. Now, the cows can eat all day because they've got about 5 stomachs, but not human beings. So Atkins found, and the paleo diet says much the same thing, the FODMAP diet says much the same thing. So there are many authors today who are doctors with decades of clinical practice up their sleeve who are basically saying the same thing. You see, these 3 food groups keep the food in the stomach longer. Important point on a weight loss program. These 3 food groups also are the essential food groups. Why essential? Well, fibre is essential because fibre keeps that colon moving, and it's pretty important that the plumbing's working well. Fibre stimulates movement in the colon. Fibre also sweeps the colon. And it's also in the fibre part of your food that you'll find a lot of your nutrients intensified. Now, I do not eat the skin of pineapples and oranges and mangoes and pawpaws. But when I was a little girl, Mum peeled everything. But we don't peel a lot of things. We don't peel potatoes today, do we? I mostly don't peel cucumbers. I don't peel carrots. So that's what I mean by the skins. And they're basically one of the highest fibre. Fibre is essential. Protein is essential. Yesterday we looked at the DNA. We looked at how the crossword bands are made up of amino acid. The new cell is built up by amino acid breakdown from the protein we eat. 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is made up of protein. That's pretty important. In fact, once you take the water out, protein is the main substance that our body is made up of. Protein is essential. You cannot heal without protein. You cannot build new cells without protein. 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is fat, except for the brain cell. The membrane around each cell in the brain is 70% fat. Did you know the brain is the fattiest organ in the body, and the brain loves fat? Got that? Now, there are fats and there are fats. And the best fats are the fats that come from the hand of the Creator in your nuts and your seeds and your avocados and your coconuts. And the 2 concentrated fats that are the best fats are your coconut oil and your olive oil. Both oils have been used for centuries. And the cultures that use these oils always had fine health. Fat is an essential nutrient. Your sex hormones are made from fat. Your stress hormones are made from fat. It's pretty important. They're the 3 essential food groups. But what Atkins found in his research, and there are many today who are claiming the same thing, is that your non-essential food group is carbohydrates. Last year, Catalyst, August, you can go to iView and still see this, a show called Fat or Fiction, and there was a a nutritionist, professor of nutritionist, he said, you can live very, very well without 1 dot of carbohydrates. Now let me very quickly get a balance on this. Carbohydrates are not bad. Got that? They're not bad. It's only when they're overdone and refined. And can you see what most people are doing today? It's overdone, and in a lot of cases, it's refined. But I have even found people to overdo the unrefined. What a relief. My husband would never forgive me if there were no potatoes at their main meal. We love the carbs. They're only a problem if they're overdone and refined. So considering the 3 essential food groups and considering the non-essential food group, if someone wanted to lose weight quickly, what would they drastically drop? The carbs. If someone wanted to conquer diabetes quickly, what would they drastically drop? The carbs. The carbs. And very safely too. I've seen it happen hundreds of times. Hundreds of times. And it's not forever. Once you've conquered your diabetes, you can start to slip in a little bit more carbs. Once you've conquered your weight, you can start to slip in a little bit more carbs. I eat a very low carbohydrate diet. I'm not overweight. I'm not a diabetic. I just love it because I have so much energy. What's the old saying? If you're on a good thing, stick to it. The Bible says in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. It's Old English. It means if it works, keep at it. One lady said, do you ever step sideways? I said, why would I? I enjoy so much what this does for me. Atkins, the FODMAP, paleo diet, I'm sure we've all heard of it. There's even paleo restaurants today. They all advocate meat for protein, yep. And I'm a vegetarian. How can you do this on a vegetarian diet? To do it on a vegetarian diet, we need to have a look at vegetarian protein. And we're going to go to Genesis 1:29, where God tells Adam and Eve what to eat. So we're going to look at the food, we're going to look at the protein content, and we're going to look at the carbohydrate content. Thank you. And God said to Adam and Eve, behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth. What's a herb-bearing seed? A herb-bearing seed is a grain. So there's one. Another herb-bearing seed is a legume. Another herb-bearing seed is a seed. So what's the grain? Wheat, rye, barley, oats, amaranth, buckwheat, millet, quinoa, so many grains. They are high in protein and they are quite high in carbohydrates. How many on our carbohydrate list are from the grain? So cereal, bread, cakes, pie, pizza, pasta, rice, the majority are from the grain department. What's a legume? Lentils, chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, cannellini beans, kidney beans, soy, so many legumes. Legumes are high in protein and they are medium to low in carbohydrate. And you will find a lot of the low-carb books advocate don't eat legumes because they have carbs. Well, they do, but not a lot. The fact is they have about a third the carbohydrate that you will find in the grain. What's a seed? Sesame seed, sunflower seed. Did you know that the sesame seed is phenomenally high in calcium? And a nice way to have that is tahini. My kids used to love tahini and honey on bread. You can make some beautiful dressings with tahini. A lot of Lebanese food uses tahini. Something like 1,400 milligrams of calcium in a cup. That's pretty phenomenal. Milk doesn't come anywhere near it. Milk has calcium that can be accessed if you've got 5 stomachs. But we don't, do we? The countries in this world with the highest incidence of osteoporosis are the highest consumers of cow's milk. Cow's milk's excellent milk for calves. Got that? But the milk you buy in the supermarket, which is homogenised and pasteurised, if that's given to a baby calf, that calf dies. Bit scary, isn't it? Pumpkin seed. Did you know that pumpkin seed has something like 41 grams of protein to a cup? It's higher than any meats, is the humble pumpkin seed. So pumpkin seed, sunflower seed, chia seed, flaxseed or linseed. These seeds are high in protein and they are low in carbohydrate. God said, "Behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree, in the which of the tree is a fruit-bearing seed." What's a fruit-bearing seed? There's your nut. And there are so many nuts, aren't they? Cashews, pecan nuts, walnuts, macadamia nuts, almonds, Brazil nuts. So many nuts. And nuts are high in protein and they are quite low in carbohydrate. So to ensure that you're getting the three essentials, my suggestion is increase the nut, seed, legume part of the meal. And to ensure you don't overdo the non-essential, decrease the decrease the grain part of the meal. That's an easy way to do it. Easy way. For lunch today, I had a big salad. I had a tahini salad dressing. I had some black-eyed beans with kale and zucchini, tomato and onion and fresh basil. Delicious. And then we had fresh sweet corn. Now that meal, very low in carbohydrates. We ate about 2:30 or 3. It is now 7 o'clock. I have no hunger at all. And I know that that will take me all the way to bed. You can eat very well on a low carbohydrate meal. That meal was very high in fibre. Everything had fibre. That meal had generous amounts of protein. Oh, and I finished with a handful of walnuts. Very nice dessert. Generous amounts of fat. Fat in the walnut, fat in the avocado, fat in the tahini and olive oil dressing. Olive oil in the bean mix. It's a nice balance of it. Doesn't weigh you down. How many people feel like sleeping after lunch because they're just overloaded with the carbs? That's an easy way to do it. I think I need metho on this. It's not behaving. You will find that most of the health professionals today are saying what I'm saying. And the paleo diet, the FODMAP diet, Atkins diet, also Bruce Fife in his book, they are advocating exactly what I'm saying. Now, these doctors have decades of clinical practice up their sleeve, but something else has come into the equation. Because Aussies and New Zealanders have been eating sugar for a long, long time. What else has come into the equation is a grain that you will find, if you wouldn't mind working away at that, you will find most cereals are made out of this grain. You will find most breads are made out of this grain. Most cakes are made out of this grain. Pies and pizza are made out of this grain. Pasta is made out of this grain. So all from here. They are all made out of that grain. Can anyone guess what it is? It's wheat. One man said to me, "But Barbara, God made wheat." I said, "He did, but not this one." One lady said to me, "But the Bible talks about, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Bread is the staff of life." I said, "It was in Jesus' day, but it is not anymore." Let me give you the wheat story. In the 1950s, a group of scientists in Mexico put wheat through intensive crossbreeding. And this intensive crossbreeding produced a wheat with a high yield. Now, they did it to save the starvation crisis. Now, I don't know if you remember, if you say my era, when I was a little girl, wheat grew this high. And if you go and look at wheat today, do you know how high it grows? Only that high. Maybe they don't grow a lot of wheat in New Zealand. In Australia, the big wheat grows. You see, at first, with the high yield, the stalk would break because it had such a heavy yield. So they went back to the drawing board and they came up with a plant that only grew this high, had a very thick stem, and it could hold the high yield. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a wheat farmer do our program. He said, "You're right, my brother and I are wheat farmers. We have been for many years." He said, "Sometimes we get 10-fold more grain per acre." Can you see why the farmers love it? And so it was in about the 1970s that this wheat went worldwide. In 1969, Dr. Norman Bulag got a Nobel Prize for his hybridised wheat. So by the 1990s, in Australia, in New Zealand, every cereal, every bread, every cake, every pie, every pizza, every donut, every biscuit, every pasta, what's it made out of? The hybridised wheat. Now, what happened with this hybridised wheat? I'll just wipe that off. What happened with this hybridised wheat? What was never addressed was the effect on the human body, the effect on the gut. And what this hybridised wheat produced was a type of starch. It's called amylopectin. Amylopectin A is the starch found in this hybridised wheat. Now, amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, and you've always get a corresponding dump. Amylopectin B is what's found in bananas and potatoes. And amylopectin B, it gets it up fairly high, not as high, and so you get a drop too, but not as low. You see that? Amylopectin C is what is found in chickpeas, lima beans, legumes, and it gets a nice steady rise and steady drop. Now, because of that amylopectin A, it has a very high reading on the glycemic index. Are you familiar with the glycemic index? Because the glycemic index of foods is how quickly the food breaks down to glucose in the blood. So your baseline for glycemic index is 55. So anything below 55 is low. Anything above 55 is high. Let me give you an illustration. Cherries are 26. In fact, in most of the low-carb books, they advocate the only fruit to eat is blueberries, blackberries, strawberries, cherries, because they're very low on the glycemic index. Sugar, whether it be molasses, whether it be brown, whether it be raw, whether it be white, it has a glycemic index of 59, and we're not surprised. The refined wheat, so that would be white bread, white cereals, cakes made out of white flour, 69. Wow. So that white bread products is higher than sugar. I'm glad you're sitting down because the next information is shocking. Wholemeal. So wholemeal wheat. So that's wholemeal bread, wholemeal pasta, 72. How could that be? How could wholemeal bread get the blood sugar level up quicker and higher than white bread? Well, because it's not refined, it has more of the amylopectin A in it. Can you see that? One lady said, "Are you saying white bread's better than wholemeal?" No. No, I'm not. The problem is the wheat. I presented this one day at our health retreat, and a lady began to cry. I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "I'm type 2 diabetic. I was diagnosed 2 years ago." She said, "I do everything they tell me. I have wholemeal bread, wholemeal cereal, wholemeal pasta. And every 6 months I visit the doctor and he puts me on more insulin." What's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. She said, "I'm crying tears of frustration because I do everything that they tell me and I'm getting worse." She said, I'm crying tears of joy right now because you have just solved the problem. Now, if you want to pursue this a little bit more, there's a book called Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis. And he will explain this issue in detail. Why is his book called Wheat Belly? Because this blood sugar level that goes up so high under the effect of the amylopectin A in this hybridized wheat, very quickly the body's got to do something with that. And what does it do with it? Stores it as fat. He said this amylopectin A, once the blood sugar drops because of the high insulin release, it gets stored on the internal organs, pushing the belly out. But not only that, it's a type of visceral fat that gets stored on the belly. So you got a double whammy of pushing it out. In his book Wheat Belly, Dr. William Davis must say the term wheat belly nearly every page. He has decades of clinical practice up his sleeve. Hundreds of his patients have conquered diabetes and weight gain through dropping of the wheat. Is it that simple? Well, it's part of the equation. But it solves the puzzle. Because Aussies, New Zealanders have been eating sugar for a long time, and sugar doesn't get off the hook. Sugar certainly is a big contributing factor, but something has caused this explosion. And it is the hybridized wheat. There is also a problem with the gluten, because it's produced an incredibly complex gluten. No wonder we have so much gluten intolerance today. You look at the timeline worldwide in the 70s, by the 1990s, all of those foods are made out of this hybridized wheat. When did gluten intolerance appear? Going into the 2000s, when Aussies are starting to actually show the results of this wheat. But you've not only got that, you've got the problem of babies being fed starch too young before they've got their molars to be able to deal with it. Do you know 100 years ago, babies weren't given food? And the first teeth are 4 at the top, 4 at the bottom, and they're called milk teeth, because that's all babies should have. Milk. Then the molars appear where they grind. And when the grinding molars come through, then ptyalin is released in the mouth. And ptyalin is the amylase enzyme that breaks down starch. So with my babies, I gave them no starch until the molars were through. That can be 20 months, even to 2 years. And what are mothers told to give their babies in the first 4-6 months of life? Pharax, yeah, pure starch. That's setting up the gluten intolerance. It's setting up gut problems. We're going to go back to the old ways. So many little bits and pieces come together to make us who we are. But the good news is we live in an incredible body that has an amazing ability to heal itself when you give it the right conditions. Last night I told you the story of a couple of people who'd conquered their eczema by stopping the wheat, conquering irritable bowel by stopping the wheat. So many symptoms. I could have an answering service on my phone. Stop the wheat, dairy, refined sugar. Next, stop the wheat, dairy. Is it that simple? Well, it's not quite that simple, but it is a large part of it. You can eat a slice of bread and it'll be out of your body in 24 hours, but the effect can remain for up to 6 weeks, 2 months. And if someone says, well, I've been doing it for 6 weeks and I'm not getting the results, I say, well, do you have any mold exposure or chemical exposure? They can be exasperating the problem. That's why the detective hat always must go on to find out why these things are so. Newton's third law of motion: to every action there is an equal and an opposite reaction. Now, to allow you to fully digest what I've just presented, because to some it may be quite shocking news. It was certainly quite shocking news when I first looked at it. But I've seen such amazing results And the books that I've quoted, there's Gut and Psychology by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. There's also Stop Autism Now and Stop Alzheimer's Now by Dr. Bruce Fife. There's Grain Brain by Dr. David Pertmuller, and William Davis's book, Wheat Belly. They are all basically saying the same thing. And what does the proverb say? In a multitude of counsellors, there's safety. And these people are all coming to the same conclusions, and we find two in our health centre. Yes? Where does spelt flour come in? Spelt is a wild or field hybrid from the original wheat grain. So spelt and kamut. I'll write them up here for you. Spelt. One lady said, how do you spell it? Spelt. And kamut. They are wild or field hybrids of the original wheat. They don't have the amylopectin A, and they do not have the complex protein structure. If someone is celiac, often they can't even handle that. They have to heal that gut first. But even people who are sensitive or intolerant to wheat can usually handle these two. I'm going to give everyone a break now. It is almost 5 to 8. If you could please come back at 8:05, that's a 10-minute break. We will continue our presentation. And out the back here, there are there's big jugs of water with lemon and mint in it. And Amelia, here's Amelia, she will be manning the books and the DVDs out the back. But there's one more question there I'll answer before I go, but the lady's not looking at me. Yes? You had a question. That's a good question, and I'll cover that in our next section. Thank you. Have a good break. Oh, there's one more question, yes? You can get it as spelt and kamut. The original wheat was called Enkhorn, which is almost impossible to get now. But these two have wild hybrids from the Emma wheat. So you can put these names into the web and you might find them somewhere. But the spelt and kamut are quite easy to get. And again, they're wild or field hybrids of these original grains. So they're very similar. So we're going to begin looking, or continue, I should say, looking at some of the causes. And what I'd like to write down here is some of the causes of diabetes. And wheat and sugar are big contributing factors. Another contributing factor is dairy. And in the book, The China Study, Dr. Colin Campbell, he explains this one. When a human takes dairy, in the majority of cases, it's difficult to break down because we haven't got the 5 stomachs. And so molecules come into the blood that aren't properly broken down, and the body creates antigens to deal with them. Now, their molecular structure is very similar to the molecular structure of the beta cells in the pancreas. And so these pathogens, they're wiping out these molecules from the partially broken down milk, and then they look over at the pancreas and start to break down the beta cells in the pancreas. I hope I didn't lose you with that one. And so dairy is a big contributing factor. Colin Campbell states that children that have cow's milk in the first year of life have a 70% greater risk of developing type 1 diabetes. And yet, what would most children have for breakfast? Cereal, milk and sugar. That's what I had as a child, yeah? So that's another causative factor. Number 3 is drugs. Many drugs have as their side effect an effect on the beta cells in the pancreas to break them down. There is much research today, and I know a Dr. Glassons from America, he pioneered a lot of this research in about the 80s, that the polio vaccine was causing the type 1 diabetes. That's quite alarming, isn't it? Do you know the health department have put a statement out in the last few days that the only cases of polio around today are from the polio vaccine. Polio was wiped out before vaccines came in. Quite alarming, isn't it? The human body was designed to heal itself, and it'll heal itself if you give it the right conditions. And I had a lady ring me up with a 16-month-old child with diabetes, and she said it developed after her vaccinations. Now, there are children that are vaccinated that don't have diabetes. It's like this really. It's the best way to explain it. A whole lot of little threads come together to make a strong rope, and a strong man cannot break that rope. But a little mouse that strong man could step on and squash can start eating at all those little threads. And the rope that the strong man could not break, that little mouse successfully does by nibbling at those threads. We are a combination of a whole lot of bits and pieces, aren't we? And that's why I believe we should be the doctor. Where to put the detective hat on and thread all of those threads. Another cause of diabetes is the bleach that they bleach flour with. Now flour, or wheat flour, or even spelt flour, kamut flour, if the bran and the wheat germ are taken out, it's almost the colour of the inside of my skin there, like a light beige colour. And so they wanted the wheat or the flour white. So they bleach it with a bleach called alloxan. And alloxan, the research is showing now, kills the beta cells in the pancreas. So another reason why this wheat is contributing to it. And so, number one, to get a turnaround with diabetes is the wheat and the sugar must stop, the dairy must stop, and ideally the drugs stop. Now, some people are on medications that cannot be stopped straight away. Some medications can be stopped straight away, and that's why it is good to get some advice on that. The medications that must not be stopped straight away are things like antidepressants, things like your cortisone drugs. There can be a major reaction if you stop them. What we do at Misty Mountain Health Retreat is we get people to begin implementing lifestyle changes. The body gets strong, the body starts working better, and then they can ease off the medications. That's probably the best way to do it. But if you are on medication, it is good to get advice on how that can be taken off, especially if a person has been on it for years. Tomorrow night when I look at heart health, I'll be directly addressing things like cholesterol-lowering medication, blood thinning medication, and blood pressure medication. So we'll be looking at that tomorrow night. Regarding insulin, what I find when people come to our health retreat, within 38 hours they're having to reduce their medication because their blood sugar levels are going too low. And this young man, Dan, that I told you about, remember I said that every night he'd get a blood sugar level low. Do you know what that meant? He's on too much insulin. By the third week, Dan had reduced, now this is type 1 diabetic, he'd reduced his insulin by 90%. That's in 3 weeks. That's incredible, isn't it? That's so quickly he was getting those results. Now there was something else that he was doing, so we'll put here, eliminate. These are the things that must be eliminated. Is these 3 things here. Now we're going to go over what needs to be implemented, and this is 8 glasses of water a day. Now, some people look at that and feel overwhelmed. In this weather it's not hard though, is it? But in the middle of winter, it's a little bit harder. Now, the best way to get that water in is little by little by little. One lady said, I can't drink water, it makes me feel sick. I can't drink water, it bloats me. And then I found out she would drink 500 mils all at once. Now, if I have a plant that's a bit dry and I put 500 mils all in at once, what happens? Where does the water go? It all runs down the bottom. But if I come to that dry plant and put a little bit in, and then a bit later a little bit more, I can get 500 mils into that plant without any overflow. So little by little by little. I find it difficult to drink a whole lot of water at once, but I've just got my water bottle always by me. I sip here, I have a little bit more there, I have a little bit more there. I just have it always by me. And you'll be amazed how much water you can get into your body. Have it in the car, have it at the desk, have it in the kitchen, have it out in the garden. Just have it always there, a couple of sips at a time. And there is one way that you can get that water into the cell so that you're not visiting the little house all the time, so that the feet don't swell. I mentioned in that question about the edema, and I'll look at it a little bit more tomorrow. We need to take the whole salt. Now, whole salt, and I'll be looking at this in detail tomorrow night, whole salt is unrefined sea salt. And there's a couple of ways we get it in Australia. One is Himalayan salt, and another is Celtic salt. And Celtic salt is one of my favourites because it has 3 magnesiums in it. And the Celtic salt has 82 minerals. Himalayan salt is very similar. Himalayan salt is certainly better than the refined salt. You know, the refined salt has 2 minerals. And there's a verse in the Bible that talks about the salt. It's Matthew 5:13. It's Jesus speaking. He says, "Ye are the salt of the earth. If the salt hath lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men." Just think of that when you look at that table salt. Henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men. We use it a little bit at our health retreat for the leeches. Put it on the leech, it gets off. No, we don't have many leeches, only when we have a lot of rain. Good for nothing but the leech. You see, as I'll show you tomorrow night, because it's so imbalanced, it causes this big imbalance in the body. Now, Celtic salt has 3 magnesium, and magnesium pulls the water inside the cell. Remember the CBD? The CBD is where we need that water, and the magnesium pulls it inside the cell. So how do we take the salt? I take a crystal of Celtic salt on my tongue before every glass of water that I drink. Now, I did say I sipped, but every time I start a new glass, I'll put a crystal on my tongue and I'll drink a few mouthfuls, then I'll drink a few more mouthfuls. When I've done a cup, then I'll have another crystal of salt. You see, we are so mineral deficient today because the soils are deficient, the plants are deficient, and if you have a crystal of Celtic salt on your tongue before you drink every glass of water, all you will do is replace the minerals you lost yesterday. Especially do you need it in this hot weather because you are perspiring. Have you ever tasted your perspiration? It's very salty. So you think about it, we're salty people. We need that salt. And that salt allows the water to be taken inside the cell. Now this cell, I'm talking about your pancreatic cells. The pancreas cannot make these hormones to balance the blood sugar levels unless it has adequate minerals. And the best place, the cheapest place, the most effective place is in the salts, because we need the minerals in a way that the body can use them. And because they are in the way that they are found in the body, when you take it, it liquefies and it gets through the membrane of the cell, gets that water inside the cell. It's well documented. It's the quickest way to hydrate a body, is to take that salt. If you were under the impression that salt was bad, and this is news to you, and you're used to no salt, my suggestion is start slowly. Just have the tiniest little bit, because your body, one of the most amazing things about the body is its ability to adapt and adjust. And the body, if your body's had no salt, it has adapted and adjusted to that, and as you'll see tomorrow night, at a cost. But now, if you want it to take the salt, which is a good idea to do because we need those minerals, there'll be a little bit of time getting the body to adapt and adjust back to that. But it is a delicious salt. It's very nice on your food as well, of course. So it's very important to take the salt. Another very important point of conquering diabetes, conquering weight, is exercise. And there is a type of exercise that gets the body up onto a more effective and better rate of running. There is a type of exercise that will stimulate the development of more insulin receptor sites. In a matter of days, you can conquer insulin resistance. Isn't that good news? If you implement the things I'm putting down here. Exercise. What is this interval training? Interval training, as the name implies, are intervals of high intensity and periods of recovery for a cycle. So a lot of the research with this has been done on exercise bikes, because I can testify it's not easy to run for 30 seconds. If you think to yourself, she doesn't know what she's talking about, I want you to try it tomorrow. In fact, at 20 seconds, my body is screaming at me, stop. But the type of exercise that's going to wake up that pancreas, the type of exercise that is going to wake up the insulin receptor sites on the cell and get them moving again, is the type of exercise that's very, very hard work. It's going to get you out of your comfort zone. Now, if you can't run, exercise bike. Can't exercise bike? Swim. Can't swim? Push-ups. Can't push-ups? Push-ups on the wall. Fitboard. You just got to find out what works for you. It may be a good idea to go to a gym and try different pieces of equipment and see what works for you. Then go home and we have Gumtree or eBay in Australia. You can buy second-hand pieces of equipment. But the exercise bike, most people find, is the easiest way to do this high intensity. If you can't do 30 seconds high intensity, start with 10 or start with 15. But remember, don't stop when your body tells you to. You push yourself a little bit more. It's that pushing of yourself that strengthens that heart, and I'll talk about it in detail again tomorrow night. But it's that pushing of yourself that's going to waken up the insulin receptor sites on the cell, and he's going to wake up that pancreas. Now, Dan told me that his doctor told him his pancreas was dead. 20. I said, is it gangrene? What's dead? If there's blood and if there's lymph going through that pancreas, there's life, and there is the ability to revive. The fact that he dropped his insulin by 90% by the 3rd week is an indication of what's starting to work. The pancreas. He adjusted it according to his blood sugar levels. They kept going lower and lower, so he'd go less, less, and that's how you do it. 30 seconds high intensity, 90 seconds recovery for about a cycle of 6. If at first you can't do a cycle of 6, do a cycle of 3. You just got to start with where you're at. Dr. Al says in his book PACE, his PACE means progressive acceleration of cardiopulmonary exertion. You don't have to repeat that back to me. Progressive, that means what you can't do now, you'll be able to do in a few days. Have you done the maths on that? Impressive, isn't it? What's this, 10 minutes a day? I'm a busy lady. I love it. I used to do 2K half-hour walk. Now I do 15 minutes. That's all I do. But I incorporate the high intensity. You got to work and work hard. And when Dan came back from his morning walk, his clothes were wet, and he was like this. This is working hard. What sort of effort do you think the Olympian athletes put into their training? They put everything into it. Now, we're training for something more important than the Olympic Games, you know that. We're training for life. We're training for quality of life. And what you do to your body now will determine how you spend those latter years. And each one of us have the opportunity that our latter years will be comfortable, will be enjoyable. Isn't that what God meant? God never ever designed for people to suffer for the last 20 years of their life and then pass away. And to the point where the passing of the way is a great blessing because they are in so much suffering. He never meant for people to be on huge amounts of medication in the latter years of their life. No. And as I'll show you on Saturday morning, God never meant the brain to deteriorate. Brains and bodies are deteriorating far too young. And remember, drugs never never cure disease. They only change the form and location of the disease. The body is the only thing with the ability to heal you and I, and it will if you give it the right conditions. So the exercise is a very important part. Your fitness is not determined by how hard and fast you can go, but how long you take to recover. So if your first high intensity requires you 4 minutes recovery time, that's all right. It's not going to stay like that. Age has nothing to do with this. Got that? Age has nothing to do with it. Do you know the trainers today for the athletes are finding that this interval training is so effective. You'll find they're all doing it. And it also means you only need to do 15 minutes instead of an hour jog. You can get more out of a 15 minutes high intensity than an hour jog. And I don't know many people that have got that hour. I got too much to do. I just love it because I run out the door, and when I get, well, Amelia and I, we dive in the creek every morning after we've done it, and we need to because we're hot. Sometimes we need to take a change of clothes when we get out of the creek. And often I'll do my last high intensity in the creek, swimming against the tide. Once you start doing this, the feeling that you will get from it is so good. Your mind will be sparkier. Every cell in the body starts to work more effectively. And guess what starts getting burnt? Oh, it got rubbed out. Those fat cells. And that's one of the reasons why it's so effective in weight loss. It's incredibly effective with diabetes because of the stimulation of more receptor sites, more insulin receptor sites, because of the stimulation of the pancreatic cells, the beta cells that make the insulin to revive. But when you're starting to do that morning exercise program and your glycogen stores get used up, where does the body going to go now for fuel? It goes to the fat cells. So exercise is essential. Every day, I do it every day. I never miss. I've got an appointment. It's a little bit different here because of the time change, but at home, I usually wake at 5, I usually walk at 6, and I eat at 7. That's my appointment. I have an appointment. And you know, when we make an appointment, we've got to keep that appointment, don't we? That's the easiest way to do it. But I have known many people that have had incredible change in their life through this. And recently I was shown the value of this because sometimes I only do 3 high intensities because I just haven't got enough time. And I was in Georgia, in America, about 4 months ago. And I was talking to a young man and he wanted to pick my brains. And I said, I'm free tomorrow afternoon. He said, I've got to do a mountain climb. Do you want to come? I said, yeah. Now, the guy he was walking with couldn't come. He said, do you still want to do it? I said, yeah. So he's picking my brains the whole time. Now, we're walking like this, an hour and a half. Now, I pushed myself because I didn't want to hold him up. And every now and then I said, let's look at the view for a while. How long do you take to recover? Until your breathing and your heart rate settles down again, and then you can go it again. But I really did push myself. And it was winter, and it was cold, and my clothes were wet, and it's not easy. I don't perspire easily. Coming down was a lot easier, but we got lost. And so we were battling through the bush. We finally got home. I'm glad it's winter because the leaves were off the trees and you could see through the bush. I got home and had the best shower I think I've ever had. And I thought to myself, I am going to be sore tomorrow. Not one bit of soreness. I couldn't believe it. Not one bit of soreness. And I thought, this is incredible. Sometimes I'm only 15 minutes in the morning. And yet that sort of training gets the body up onto a far more efficient and effective rate of running. So exercise, not negotiable. Again, if you're not fit, and you find it difficult, just do what you can, but push yourself a little bit more every day. Your heart will get stronger, your lungs will start working better, and when your lungs work better, what are you going to get more of? Oxygen. The Framingham Heart Study, very famous study, it's been done over 30 years, 25,000 people, so it's often quoted. It found that by the age of 50, people had lost 40% lung capacity. That's a bit scary. By the age of 80, 60% lung capacity has been lost. So 40% lung capacity is lost. Does that mean 40% of the cells can't get down to here? They can only run up here? How much energy is that going to give you? So what can you do to prevent lung capacity loss? Interval training. What can you do to regain it? Interval training. How many people from about, sadly, 40 up get scared when their body goes, you got to do that. That's how you retain it. And that's how you also retain your abdominal breathing. Abdominal breathing gets more oxygen into the cells. And as you can see, that's all we need, more oxygen. It's the most vital element needed for life. You just got to move. You've got to move fast. You've got to push yourself till you think you're dying. Did you hear that? Number 7, early nights. Early nights? What's this got to do with diabetes? Between the hours of 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., there are hormones released in our body that are responsible for rest and rejuvenation. So if you're looking at conquering your diabetes, you've got to go to bed early so that those hormones can be released and do their repair on your pancreas. In the winter time, it's between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So very important to do that. Many people are going to bed late because of the screens. And when your eyes are on screens in these hours, that totally blocks your rest and rejuvenate nighttime hormones. It also increases learning capacity, also increases mood in the body. In my DVDs, I go into a little bit more detail on that one. But that's why early nights are important for any sort of repair and healing in the human body. Number 8. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to give you the sort of food to be eating to bring about repair in the human body. So this is a high fibre diet. So a high fibre diet, remember this, vegetables are high in fibre, high in minerals, low in sugars. And minerals are your healer, whereas fruit are high in fibre, high in sugars, low in minerals. So for a diabetic, for someone wanting to conquer weight in the body, they need to go more vegetables, less fruit. And ideally, low GI. So in here we put all your low GIs. So low GI fruits, there's fibre. Vegetables. One lady said, isn't carrot high? I said, you'd have to eat a truckload of carrots to get your blood sugar high. And all your plant-based food, so all your nuts, all your legumes, they're all high fibre, and all your whole grains. Now let me give you a list of grains that are the best grains. Your wholemeal rice, millet, and quinoa, spelt quinoa, buckwheat. There are so many grains that we can pursue. Be very cautious of gluten-free cakes, gluten-free breads, because they can have very high glycemic grains in them, and they're often loaded with sugar. So they're your best grains. Generous amounts of protein. So the best protein is found in your legumes. Let me give you a little tip with legumes. Most people don't know this. Let me tell you how I did the black-eyed beans for lunch today. I had them cooking in one pot. In the other pot, I had the tomato and the onion and the ginger and the garlic and the kale and the zucchini. And when the black-eyed beans were soft, I rinsed them and rinsed them and rinsed them and rinsed them. Did everyone get that? I'm washing away the dirty water. It is that water that causes most of the problems that people experience if they eat legumes. And when I've washed all the dirty water away, then I put my legumes in with my flavourings. For breakfast this morning, I had little dark blue lentils. They were cooking while I was running up and down hills. When I came back, I rinsed them again and again. The pot they were in had this scum around the edge. In fact, I scrubbed the pot clean, rinsed the lentils, put the lentils back in the pot, put oil, thyme and salt with it, and some parsley. Ladies, was it delicious? Delicious. It doesn't need much. And I'm climbing hills in the morning. I haven't got time to be cooking fancy things in the morning. So your legumes, most people don't realise that. My husband had a problem with lentils when we first married. So what I started to do, they were well rinsed, I just give him a little bit, a teaspoon. A couple of days later, 2 teaspoons, until eventually he can handle lentils quite well now. What about tofu? If you can get non-GMO, organically grown tofu, it's safe. Nuts and seeds. I think everyone should have about 8 to 10 nuts every meal. That's not hard, is it? Most people don't do it and then buy a packet of cashews and eat the whole lot. Yeah, just have a few every meal. It's a delicious ending to a meal. And healthy fats. And as I mentioned before, the healthy fats come from your nuts, your seeds, your avocados. And also, history shows us that the 2 oils that have been used for centuries, and the people that use these oils experienced incredible health, is the coconut oil and the olive oil. Now, Dr. Bruce Fife, he's written about 5 books on the coconut oil. Incredible information in those books. I think that man should be getting a Nobel Prize for the work he's done on coconut oil. Some say, but it's a saturated fat. Some say, but it'll give you heart disease. There is no proof of that. There is no proof of all of that. And you look at the island people. When Captain Cook arrived, he was confronted with the most magnificent specimens of humanity he had ever seen. What did they eat every meal? Every meal. Coconut. What's the size today of the island people? Oh, they're very big. What are they eating? Here it is. What have they stopped? The coconut. It's not the coconut, it's because they've stopped the coconut. That's the problem. And low carbs. What about sugars? Now, last night a man asked me about stevia. Now, stevia is a sugar that does not get a pancreatic response with insulin. If you use too much, it gets a bit of flavour, but I think it's a good idea to train the taste away from the sweets. If a person has a diabetic, they really have to be very cautious with even maple syrup or honey, the natural sugars. Some say, isn't sugar a natural sugar? Sugar is as closely related to the sugarcane plant as heroin is to the poppy plant. Nothing wrong with sugarcane. It's the pure acid that's been extracted, and that is the sugar. So for a diabetic, a little bit of sweetening, they could use stevia. Also coconut sugar or palm sugar, which is the nectar, crystallized nectar from the flower of the palm. So it's also an unrefined sugar. What about dried fruit with a diabetic? Don't touch it. Very high glycemic index. And remember, it's not forever. It's just until you conquer it. And once you've conquered it, then you may have a little bit. I have seen many conquer it. What about type 1 diabetes? I have seen type 1 and type 2 diabetes conquered. Sometimes if someone is doing all of this and still struggling, by the way, I'll also put, did I say low GI? 9. It's good to get a glycemic index and know the low GI foods. But I have seen type 1 and type 2 diabetics conquer their diabetes. It takes a little bit of work, but the results are well worth it. But sometimes if there's not getting results, one have to check that they don't have exposure to mold and they don't have exposure to chemicals. So the things to be eliminated, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to do this. And this is one more that I have not yet mentioned. And it's something that Australians and New Zealanders love, and it's something that should be eliminated, and that is caffeine. Was that a groan? There is a way to come off the coffee without suffering. People say, do you drink coffee, Barbara? I say, no, I just watch the people suffer. Don't we, Amelia? Day 1, Misty Mountain Health Retreat. More people suffer from caffeine withdrawals than any other withdrawal. We've had people come off ecstasy, heroin, methadone, marijuana, alcohol, cigarettes. No one suffers like the coffee drinker. But there is a way to get off it without suffering. And the reason why the diabetic must stop this is because it causes an insulin response. And we don't want that. Say a person's on 3 cups of coffee a day. Well, tomorrow, the first cup of coffee, they have half a teaspoon of coffee and half a teaspoon of something like Caro or Echo, those cereal alternatives, cereal beverages. You familiar with that? And then a couple of days later, a quarter of a teaspoon of coffee and 3/4 of the Caro or Echo. If someone's on 3 cups of coffee a day, in about 10 days they can be off it without any pain or suffering. If someone's having 1 cup of coffee a day, they often can be totally off it in 5 days. On Saturday morning, I'll be showing you how it causes a chemical imbalance in the brain, so a huge contributing factor to mental illness. And in Australia, the current figures are 50% of people suffering from mental illness. But an even scarier figure is 1,700 cases of Alzheimer's are being diagnosed every week in Australia, and it is a preventable disease. And if caught in early stages, it can even be turned around. That's good news. So these are the simple lifestyle changes that will ensure powerful weight loss and also a conquering of the diabetes. The pancreas has to be revived. It has to be allowed to recover. And when you implement these things here, you do that. Are there any questions before we close? Yes? Eggs. Eggs are probably one of the safest of the animal proteins, but they must be organic. Yes? Peanuts are out. Why are peanuts out? Well, if you want to know why they're out, you can read the first chapter in the China study. And you might know that peanuts are banned in schools today. It's not the peanut, it's the mould that commonly grows on the peanut. And that mould is aspergillus, and it gives off a mould waste called aflatoxin, which is the most carcinogenic substance on the planet. If you grow peanuts, harvest them, not a problem. The problem arises in the storage. Now, if you're feeling very sad right now because you love peanut butter, try macadamia butter, try cashew butter, and I think you'll find that they are just as nice, and yet they don't have the problem of the mould. There was one more question there. Yes?
I was going to ask about the water and the salt.
Yep.
Would you say you've got a water bottle, would you just put the salt inside?
No, you don't put the salt inside, and the reason is that magnesium is a water-hungry molecule and it'll dissolve in there. But when you put it on your tongue and drink it down, when it's on your tongue, already the mucous membranes in your mouth are taking in those minerals so that when you drink your water, it can take it inside the cell. Because we were meant to drink pure water. So it's just having that little bit. You know, the cows have their salt lick on the paddock. Adults, humans should have salt licks too.
So we could put it on some chickpeas for kids and the chickpeas in the water.
No, because we should not drink with our meals because it waters down our hydrochloric acid. But you give a child a bowl of salt, oh, they love it. They'll gladly take that salt. And after they've taken their salt, you won't have any trouble getting them to drink water. Yes? You will need to go, you can go to the web and get a glycemic index chart. But glycemic index says how quickly the glucose breaks down from the food in your blood. And I think I mentioned earlier your berries, they're probably the lowest. And you had another question? Rolled oats. Rolled oats are a grain, and rolled oats can be great, but if someone's got a gluten intolerance, the oats may not work well. So you try the oats. And if you have oats, my suggestion is don't have them every day. Alternate them with the other grains. But if you experience bloating after breakfast, it's usually the oats. Yes? Almonds, excellent nut. With exercise, should you do it in the morning, it's the best time, because you will reap the benefits all day long if you do it in the morning. But some people that get up very early for work, they might do it at lunchtime or after work. Yes? How fructose? Very good question. I'm actually out of time, so I'll answer this very quickly and then we must end. A lot of diabetics are going to fructose because it doesn't get an insulin response. But the only organ in the body that has fructose receptor sites is the liver. So this high fructose corn syrup that's going into a lot of breads and things today is causing fatty liver and causing liver damage, because the only organ that has fructose receptor sites is the liver. So when there's an overload of fructose, the liver has to store it as fat. So there's your fatty liver. So fructose is not a viable alternative to a sweetener. But thank you for your attention tonight. Please bow your heads as I close. Thank you, Father in heaven, for this amazing body, and thank you for this information on how to treat it and how to get better results out of it. We thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.